So I've been doing a lot of guest lectures for colleges lately, and one of the most common questions I get asked about is constructing environments for virtual production. So that is the topic I'm going to be discussing today. If you're new here, my name's Dallas, and I've worked on some of the biggest shows out there from the Mandalorian series, Avatar The Last Airbender, and many more. In addition to my time in film, I also work in game development, currently hard at work developing a new IP for our studio, soon to be announced. Enough with the credentials, let's dive into virtual production and what you need to know about building sets in a game engine ready for the screen. So here we are in Unreal Engine, and before we go ahead and start breaking down the set and all the considerations for building the environment, I want to first talk about something so incredibly crucial that many of you who are looking to get into virtual production are just seemingly keeping out of your process when it comes to developing these environments, and that is the actual stage itself. Now, these volume stages, these virtual volume stages, they come in many shapes, many sizes. Some are flat screens, some are horseshoe shaped, some are big, some are small, some are insert volumes. There's so much variety. So anytime I get hired on a project, my first question is always, which stage are we filming on? So this way I know how to orient the environment. So if we go here, for example, this is Nant Studios. So this is one of the larger volume stages. But if we look here, if you scroll down to the bottom of their website, it'll actually show you the dimensions of their LED walls of their stages. So again, this is one of the larger ones. And is it the one in El Segundo? Is it the one in Culver City? Are we filming this in Melbourne? Because all of them are different shapes and sizes. And this becomes really crucial because how else are you going to know how to properly compose your environment to fit a certain framing? And so whenever you're building these environments, or let's say you're trying to get into virtual production, let's say you currently work in games or VFX, or you're completely new, you want to get into this, I highly recommend finding a stage and creating a stage model and using that and putting that in your portfolio, putting that in your breakdowns. It'll help tremendously with your prospects of getting hired. So first and foremost, find the screen you want to use, or if you're getting hired, look up the screen that is going to be used. Bring that into your environment, whether it's be modeling or whether the client provides it for you. And so once you do, so I can't disclose which specific screen this represents, but so this is representative of a stage. So this is the sort of square footage that the stage is. And when you're building your environments, first thing you want to do before you really do anything is you want to bring in a model of the wall, and you want to just place it and start composing your scene. And then from here, one thing that I like to do, create this grid material. It's super easy to make. This grid here, it's just in this engine editor material. It's this 1x1 grid material here. And I just give it, super simple, contrast it a bit and just make it, surface translucent, default lit. You can make it unlit as well, so it doesn't interact with any of the lighting. But again, this is just the simple setup for that material, so you can see through it. So, we want to be sure that when we're looking at it, that there's some transparency. The other thing that you might want to do, if this is just for yourself, it might not be as important, but when you're working on production, one of the most important things is tying in the practical, so the assets that are going to need to be built or sourced, and blending that in with the actual virtual environment. And so part of that is, of course, going to be the ground, if they're going to be shooting angles at the ground. The other bit is going to be, like in this environment, for example, a tree, a bench perhaps. What sort of props might they want to use? And so one thing that you're going to want to do to easily distinguish this to the production designer is create some sort of stencil, some sort of decal. At our studio, we have a custom stencil. This isn't it. This is just a really simple decal. A super simple decal. Just radial gradient, color, emissive, deferred decal, translucent. That's basically it. And so this is really all you need to do. And really just to show what's going to be, what you're going to have to build if you want to actually achieve this. And so let's turn this off real quick. So all those things considered, next thing that you're going to want to do is get some sort of a stand-in, because ultimately you are building the environments, but the camera is going to be focused on a subject. And so when we are building the environments, we are trying, because with virtual production, we have complete control of the environment. We want to create an environment that sort of, one, matches the aesthetic for whatever the production is looking for, but also we want to create environments that are properly composed around the camera itself. And so, whereas in reality, if we wanted to go film in, let's say, on this set, let's say this was a real set somewhere, we can't really move anything, right? We can't just start uprooting trees and move them around. We have to shoot around it. But here, we can start really moving things, and it becomes a much more controlled, easy to use environment in that case. So, next thing that you're going to want to do from here then is create some cameras. So, go in here, grab some cameras. And again, if this is for an actual production, what you're going to want to do is use the proper naming convention that's sort of on the shot list that they're going for. If not, one thing that I like to do is I'll just name it like these three, cam, 14 millimeter, 24 millimeter, 35 millimeter. Again, if you are working with a cinematographer that has a specific lens kit, which could be an important question to ask if you are working, maybe you're doing a freelance gig and you're working on a smaller project, ask the cinematographer what lenses they like to use. And, or if they have, planned lenses, what's the sort of sensor for the camera, what kind of camera. And so in this case, what I like to do just by default, if I don't have any of that information, if I'm just kind of doing this myself, or if I'm doing a demonstration like this environment, I'll just use Super 35, 239. And using like a standard 35 is usually pretty good. 24 to 50 really is probably the range you're going to want to stay in with this. And then what I'll do is I just change my focus to tracking, and I just track the character. SG. And when you're composing the angles, you want to make sure that you're not going to be clipping outside the screen, right? So start with a lens, start with the camera. And in this case, I'm going to go a bit wider. So we'll go like 24 millimeter, and I'll just pull back. So what I like to do first and foremost, as far as like what's my primary camera to use, is I'll use something like a 24 to 35, and I'll pull back a little bit to get like a full body shot, and make sure that I'm within sort of appropriate range of the screen. So here, there's no clipping on the left, the right, or above. And so I think this is pretty good. Maybe push in a little bit. Okay. And then this one, we could just name it. So cam underscore 24 millimeter. Whoops. And call this one B. The other thing you want to consider for your environments is a sense of life to your scene. So obviously some scenes kind of lend itself to having a bit more motion in it. Others sort of lend itself to being a bit more static. But even something like this, for example, where we have some leaves kind of falling in the background, we have trees moving, things like that can be really nice. Ultimately, if this were to become a full, production, and this was going to be an actual fully developed set, if there was motion like this, what I'd probably end up doing is applying that motion to the lanterns themselves, just like just light swaying, just to tie it all in, give it all a bit more life as well. The other thing, so opposite of game development, where game development you are building to the player camera, right, where you're going to be moving around and you're going to be able to explore, touch things, and look pretty close to different things. When you are doing virtual production, all you have to consider is the distance an object is to the cinematic camera. And so oftentimes, what will end up happening is, you'll end up planning shots with the cinematographer, and, they'll start picking their angles, picking their shots, and that'll sort of define how detailed assets should be, could be, things like that. And so what I'm getting at here is you don't need to use like 8K textures, for like, really far back assets. And you can kind of optimize by distance. The other important thing, which we can actually see here, is between here, and here. So these are clear indicators of foreground with the bench, midground, and background. The reason being is because when you are filming and when you are creating one of these sets, parallax is really important. And parallax is the perceived motion of a background in conjunction to the camera. So as a camera moves, for example, you see how things based on the distance kind of move a bit differently at different speeds. So if you look at this rock back here, for example, and then if we look at this rock right here, and if we start just doing this, you can see how their movement is just a little bit different, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, depending on the object and how close it is. So that is really important. One of the biggest issues, again, that I see, especially with newer artists getting into virtual production and getting into cinematics in general, is a lack of depth or a lack of perceived depth. Meaning you can have, maybe your environment is just like really snug, really tight, and it just almost ends up looking like a wall. And the other issue you can have is you end up creating like a really vast desert, but because there's like nothing in there to give any scale reference or any reference of depth, you end up just creating this lack of parallax where it essentially looks like the world's rotating, but it's almost rotating on a plane. And so easy things to do is think of the foreground, the midground, and the background. Think of those as separate elements. And you're going to want to have the most detail in the foreground assets that are going to be directly behind the screen. And then you can sort of drop off detail as you go further back. That's one of the ways that we actually end up optimizing our scenes is we optimize based on depth as well as other ways, of course. But then also, again, with the parallaxing, it's getting elements that are enough distance apart that when the camera moves around, that the environment, there's actual movement to the environment itself. And so this is another reason actually why oftentimes for shows and projects that are filming on the volume, sometimes you might watch a show and you're looking at it and like you don't know why, but like the environment just doesn't mesh with what's going on. It doesn't feel like believable. And part of that reason is because of lack of parallax or just a static camera. A static camera on a volume screen like this, where there's no movement, where there's no leaves falling in this case, or no trees, just nothing, it's going to end up looking, no matter what you do, like there's just a dude standing in front of a screen. So you need the movement and you need the parallaxing, you need the depth, you need all these things tied in to trick the brain just enough so that the audience doesn't notice that you're just filming this on a screen. The other thing that's really good to do is lighting. So when you are lighting, you are again lighting the environment, you're lighting it to camera. And one thing that I like to do is I'll do a day scenario and I always do a nighttime lighting scenario as well. And this becomes really important because lighting and cameras are the two most integral parts in virtual production. They're the two things in which, when you're on a production, you're going to spend the most time on. When I was on Avatar, I was the lead lighting artist, and I spent months with the directors of photography, with Michael Balfrey, Stuart Whalen, Michael Goy. We spent months doing the lighting. And so you're going to end up spending a lot of time doing the lighting. One trick for lighting that can really make your environments pop is the use of spotlights. So if I go in here, for example, and I turn off, you see how many spotlights I have here? Maybe a bit too much, but let's actually go in here to the camera and I'll go into this one. So if I go in here and I grab all these spotlights and if I turn them off and just give it a minute, you see how suddenly the house sort of falls into the background a bit more, right? There's this sort of brighter fog right here in this midground that almost acts as like a cutoff point. And if we go back to like a more straight on angle, if you look at this, so with this, again, it falls a bit more into the background and that might be intentional. Perhaps, for the sake of the project, that's what it calls for, right? Not everything is going to have the not every project is going to call for the sort of fanciful lighting. However, the spotlights, if we go here and we look at this, don't mind this, whatever is going on here. Oh yeah, this is just an icon. But if we look here, so we have the moonlight in this case casting from over here, and we have these spotlights that are just adding a bit more pop to the roof. And in this case right here, just illuminating the walls a little bit more. Same with here. And just bringing a bit more of that light. And it doesn't always have to be like match 1-to-1, 100% each time. Just as long as it looks good to the camera is really going to be the most important thing. So if we go back here, the daytime doesn't have as many spotlights, but still it's doing the same thing to the house was the focus here. So go here, turn these off, turn these back on. So when I turn the lights off and on, they become noticeable. But when you turn them off, it just adds a bit more pop. The other thing as well is the post-process volume. There's a set of settings in here which often gets overlooked, and that is the local exposure. And so this can be really helpful, especially if you're doing like interior scenes or nighttime scenes. So here, for example, if we turn off the detail strength, this detail strength can be something to just add a bit of pop to your scene. So if we turn it off, we see how everything suddenly looks a bit more soft, and we turn it back on, and those highlights sort of pop a bit more. The shadows have a bit more contrast to it. It's just an overall nice effect. The other thing is film and toe. So over here, so toe, for example, one thing that you don't really want, at least unless it's otherwise specified, is you don't really want your shadows to fall into black. So what I mean by that is if we look here, for example, in this area, and it's basically just black right there between the trees. You can't see anything, meaning there is no visual data for the camera to capture. Because again, on the volume, this is going to be captured in camera live. So whatever they film, that's it. That's what they're getting. And ultimately, every movie, every show, it goes through a color correction process where they're going to be able to ultimately, add the kind of contrast they want. So what you're going to end up doing more often than not, what you're going to want to just kind of start doing in general is just lifting the shadows a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you just want to add just a bit more to it. If we go back over to the nighttime scene, we can see the post-process here, which is a bit more heavy. If I turn the post-process off, you see how without post-process and then with post-process. So the post-process really helps. So in this case, the toe, I dropped it down just to stop more. So this is without adjusting it, and then this is with adjusting it. And then again here with this, I turned shadow contrast to 0.6. Shadow contrast can be really important. So when we're looking at nighttime, what you might want to do is expose for night, which is going to be really dark, right? And then once you do that, you just start making these sort of adjustments to contrast. And then I usually add a little bit of bloom. That's just me stylistically. And then exposure, you're going to want to do some sort of manual type exposure. So in this case, for this specific lighting scenario, this is what worked for me. And yeah, so local exposure, be sure to be using it. It becomes really important. Also, turn off lens flares. The lens flares always catch me. The other thing you can always do also is add a LUT. So in this one, the nighttime one doesn't use a LUT, but the daytime one does. So if I go in here and we turn off the LUT, you see the LUT it's just slight color correction, just slight color tweaking, just to manage it a bit more. By default, things in Unreal Engine kind of have this like almost magenta look to it. And it's something that I like to just get rid of. So I'll just like take an image, bring it into Photoshop. And then what you're going to want to do is just use the neutral color lookup table. I'll link it in the description down below. And you're just going to want to use that and copy and paste those settings onto it. And remember, in virtual production, we build to screen, we build to camera. So if we turn around, there's not really much here. I just made a little bit of path over here. And if we come up here, we can see that there's not really anything, right? It's just a really small landscape and just a bunch of foliage. And that's really it. In fact, there's probably like too much foliage in here right now. Again, if this is going to be for like an actual shoot for optimization purposes, we would end up just completely removing everything that's either not casting a shadow and not being seen as well. Now, the last thing I want to say is virtual production is a growing facet of the industry, of both industries, of film and within games. As games get adapted into shows, and then the shows thus end up feeding back into the games, there's cross usage between assets. Game assets being up-res for the show and then being transferred back to the games. And there's an increased demand within studios to create that kind of content, the kind of cyclical content. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is if you work in games, or if you're a VFX artist and maybe you're interested in transitioning to games, for both people, the game developer and the VFX artist, virtual production is actually, virtual production was actually created off the backs of both game artists and VFX artists. They needed to use a game engine, but they needed people that understood film. So they took game artists, they took VFX artists, smashed them together. That became a virtual production artist. And so if you're working in game development and you're interested in film, or if you're working in VFX and you're interested in game, virtual production is a great gateway into that. And like I said, it's a growing facet within the industries. So that's it for this one. If you guys have any questions, comments, please comment down below. Join the Discord. Love to see you guys in the chat, and I'll see you guys in the next one.